As you've heard already, the government of New Brunswick, the Liberal government in Fredericton, has decided that they want to tax their way to prosperity. They're increasing corporate taxes, but more importantly for the average person, they're hiking the HST from 13 to 15%. Kevin Lacey is the Atlantic Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joins me now. And Kevin, it's not just New Brunswick. Unfortunately, it seems to be a theme of governments in the Atlantic region the last few years. The economy's not doing as well as they'd like, so tax their way to prosperity. Does it work?
Well, that's exactly right. This is yet another chapter in a long history of tax more, spend more. And if you look at the region, the economy is struggling under the weight of all these taxes. We actually have a lot going for us here in the region. We have a potential pipeline coming from Alberta. We have natural gas under our feet. Yet at the same time, here we are with one of the highest unemployment rates in all of Canada. Our government's running big deficits, all because we're under this crushing weight of these taxes. To put it in perspective, the HST you mentioned was going from 13 to 15%. It's the provincial change from 8% to 10, about a 25% increase in the sales tax. And it'll make the sales tax the highest sales tax in all of Canada that Maritimers will pay. And that's on top of already very, very high income taxes at the same time. And when you consider we get about 35% of our budgets from the rest of the country, you got to ask yourself, where's all the money going? And why is our economy still struggling under all this?
Before we start talking about spending, and there likely is a lot of overspending, most governments have it, let's talk about the tax measures. There are economists that love value-added taxes, like the HST, and they say, oh, this is the way to go, this is a clean tax, everyone knows what they're dealing with. But the people that argue that normally say, increase an HST, a GST, and lower income taxes. New Brunswick, as you pointed out, has some of the highest personal income taxes at the provincial level. They're not really cutting those, are they? I mean, there's a small adjustment to make sure New Brunswick it doesn't have a combined tax rate of, 58% for the highest income earners. But the average person is still paying more than they would in Ontario, more than they would in the Western provinces. That's not changing, is it?
That's not changing. Philosophically, you're right. I mean, sales taxes are a better way to tax than, say, income taxes. But the problem here is that we have both. We have high both sales tax and income tax rates, and that's what the average taxpayer is struggling under. Here in the Maritimes, because of our proximity to the U.S., we're being hit hard by these higher costs for things like food and clothing and the necessities that most average taxpayers need. Now you're adding something on top of that, which will raise the prices of everything else again. And our wages have been stagnant and employment has been low. So where's the money going to come from to fund these new tax increases? The government thinks that it's going to balance the books on. 6 years ago, Nova Scotia raised its HST from 13% to 15%. And at the time, they said as a result of this increase, we are going to be able to balance the books within just a few years. 6 years later, the government is still running a big deficit. And the same is going to happen in New Brunswick because these suppress economic growth and prevent people from being able to get the economy going again. And that's really what we need to do. We need to take advantage of these God-given resource industries and some of the opportunities that lay before us. Having these high sales taxes combined with these high income taxes is really a cocktail for economic disaster.
Let me ask you about that, Nova Scotia. You said the government said it would help them balance the books. It didn't. Is that because the money didn't come in the way they claim? Quite often, I listen to people that advocate tax cuts, and they say, if we put the tax to X, we will get X number of dollars. It's not a zero-sum game. When you raise taxes, you also change behavior, like suppressing the economy, or you have people decide, well, I will rearrange my life or rearrange my businesses in a certain way. And the tax revenue doesn't show up quite like they expected. They always think that if you hike taxes, you get a lot more money, and if you cut taxes, you get a lot less money. Not so. What happened in Nova Scotia?
Well, let me answer that question in two ways. First, just going back to New Brunswick, one of the things you mentioned is they brought the taxes on high income earners down. The reason they did that was because they found that when they taxed high income earners, high-income earners are mobile. And so what they did was they took their money and moved to other jurisdictions, or they simply moved to other jurisdictions to avoid paying these high taxes. But what they won't apply is the same principle to the average person, because the average person also faces these high taxes, and they also have opportunities to move to other jurisdictions. When the oil sector was booming in Alberta, thousands upon thousands of Maritimers moved to Alberta to take advantage of opportunities, but also lower taxes in order they can keep more of their money. What happened in Nova Scotia was when they raised the tax, the government simply spent it. So just before the last election, as contract negotiations were going on between public sector unions and the government simply folded, gave the public sector workers what they wanted. It cost about $300 million to fund those agreements, about the same amount of money that the 2% HST increase brought in. So they spent the 2% on a political gambit just before an election campaign, and that's what these politicians will do, because they get the revenue in, and then they expect they expect that revenue, and then they just spend it on trying to solve political problems before election campaigns.
I didn't realize that Nova Scotia's premier was Kathleen Wynne's brother. I just didn't realize that. It sounds exactly the same as Ontario.
Well, because the incentives, you make a great point. The incentives are the same. You bring the revenue in, and then politicians want to solve problems with the revenue, and they spend it.
The government in New Brunswick is bragging that they'll bring in $293 million in new revenue from this. The majority of that, and like I said, they're hiking the corporate tax rate 12 to 14%. So that's a significant hike in the corporate tax. They already increased corporate or business property taxes last year. So they're taxing away the people that are going to create the jobs. If anyone has a job left, they're going to be paying more in an HST. The majority of the new revenue is going to be coming from the HST. My calculation is, before rebates, they expect to bring in $277 million in new revenue from this HST hike. That is a deep reach into the average person's pocket on everything except what? Children's clothing and food?
Yeah, if you look at the average amount somebody over the age of 15 will spend, it'll be about, and a two-parent family will pay about $900 more in tax as a result of this HST tax increase. And to your point on the corporate tax, of course, you always hear left of center advocates say, oh, well, just make corporations pay more. We need to attract business. We can't attract business if you're telling business that they can't actually make money in the region. And that 2% for companies that do already operate in the region, that will be passed down and be borne by the workers, because there won't be the amount of money to pay workers raises in order to generate more economic benefits. So these taxes, while, sure, you think you're getting the rich guy, the guy you're actually getting is the guy on the line in a place like Florenceville that works at the McCain plant. They're the ones that are going to bear this tax increase on corporations. But what's interesting, and this is a cautionary tale, is that just before the last 2 budgets ago, the New Brunswick Business Council, of the richest and biggest businesses in the province, said we'll do our part and we'll pay 2% more in corporate income tax. Well, what they did was create a social license, not just to create 2%, but then double that and got another 2% on top of that. You give government an inch, they take a mile, and that's one of the big lessons here out of this corporate income tax rate.
And as you say, it's the guy on the line, it's the frontline worker that's going to end up paying, because they're not going to get the raise. And when I looked up the stats, New Brunswickers make on average $100 less than a counterpart in Ontario. Now, look, my family in New Brunswick will say, yeah, but our houses are cheaper. Depends on where you live. If you come to Ottawa, yeah, Ottawa's more expensive, but you make about $100 a week more for the average worker in Ontario. That's more than $5,000 a year. Plus, you're paying higher taxes down there. It incentivizes people to leave, which they are unfortunately doing. It's a beautiful part of the country, and it's seeing shrinking population.
Yeah, and I think one of the most disappointing parts for me is that we have immense opportunities right now. And when we rather than focusing on trying to raise these taxes and get the most out of what the people we already have. What we should be doing instead is looking forward and building our economy on some of the things that are coming down the pipe, which will make a big benefit. I mean, New Brunswick will be the end point of potentially a new national pipeline. It will create hundreds of jobs, create a whole new ambitious economy around a new industry that we've never seen before. But again, we need to create and look at those opportunities. We can't tax those companies out of existence before that pipeline even comes. Second is natural gas resources. I mean, we have under our feet tons of natural gas that have potential to mine, yet we send people to Alberta to mine the very resource that sit under our feet here in the Maritimes. So I think these taxes are crushing, they're hurting our region, people are moving and things are not going well, but there's potential, Brian, and I think that's what really gives me great hope, is that if we can just get the incentives right, we can become a partner again in the region like we were at Confederation, where we're actually contributing rather than taking from other provinces.
Well, hopefully they go that way instead of following the Quebec model. Kevin, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it.
Kevin Lacey is the Atlantic Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you agree that taxes are too high, then make sure you go to our petition, nohsthike.ca. Sign it, share it with your friends and family on Facebook, on Twitter, email it to somebody. Make sure people are aware and make sure they stand up and have their voice heard.